Wald. I'm the Director of Strategic Planning at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute here at Harvard Law School. We're one of the sponsoring organizations for this evening. So I want to welcome you all to Harvard Law School and thank you for coming out for this evening. And first I just want to say, I just want to say a few words on behalf of some of my colleagues who worked really hard to bring this program, as well as so many other public programs here. David Harris, who's the managing director and is currently recovering from knee surgery. Kelly Garvin, who does all of our publications, and she just had a baby the other day, so she's happily at home. And Ernest Owens, who does all the technology, and he's actually in Atlanta right now. So I'm sort of the only one standing here at the Houston Institute, but I wanted to thank all of them for the work that they do. I also want to really tell you how pleased we are and excited to be working with our partners on this program. Prisoners Legal Services, Criminal Justice Policy Coalition, Rachel Corey, who I'm about to turn the program over to, and the Harvard Undergraduate Organization for Prison Education and Reform. We're just really excited and so proud to work with these advocacy partners who have done so much to bring this issue of solitary confinement into the public, and to have legislators and the public really start to re-examine this issue, both here in Massachusetts and nationally. Hopefully we will be able to work together to end and curtail the use of solitary confinement, and perhaps even we'll see a Supreme Court challenge to this sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, I want to now turn the program over to Rachel Corey. There's some food. Please help yourself. There's a number of handouts about the program today, and you're going to see a very powerful film, and then listen to some individuals who have really experienced this firsthand. So this will not be an abstract issue any longer after today. So without any further ado, thank you again. Welcome, and I hope you really take advantage of the incredible both film and individuals that you'll hear from tonight. So here's Rachel Corey, who's the Executive Director of the Criminal Justice Policy Coalition.
Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm standing here as part of the Coalition for Effective Public Safety, and we work with all the great partners mentioned in that, and it's got three foci: solitary confinement reform, parole reform, and medical release reform. And we're focusing on solitary confinement tonight, and we're intentionally here on the 23rd because starting in California with the Prisoner Hunger Strike Solidarity Coalition in California. They, in concert with folks who are currently in solitary confinement in California, earlier this year started demanding that people outside take action on the 23rd of each month to raise public awareness about solitary confinement. The 23rd representing the 23 or more hours folks are inside solitary on a daily basis. And so in March of 2015, they began that, and it spread nationwide. And in June of this year, we in Massachusetts started taking action. And so this is our November action. Prisoners Legal Services made this short documentary about solitary confinement, specifically in Massachusetts. And we're kind of an outlier, as you'll hear on the panel tonight. We're like one of 2 or 3 states in the nation that for one disciplinary ticket, you can be written up and sent in for 10 years. And so people can rack those up and just spend their entire life there. So this is a serious issue in Massachusetts. At any given moment, right now, there are probably about 500 folks in Massachusetts in Massachusetts prisons who are in solitary confinement right now. And we don't really know much about the county level, but the way Massachusetts breakdown is, as probably many of you know, is that half of the folks incarcerated in Massachusetts are in the jails, our county jail system, and the other half are in the state prison system. So 500 of the prison population is in solitary, and we're not really sure about the county level. So this is really important that we learn more and do more about solitary in Massachusetts. So that's why we're here tonight. So I really appreciate you all being here tonight. And I'm going to introduce the panel after we screen the film, and then they'll each speak for about 10 minutes about their experiences and how those are related to what we're talking about tonight. And then we'll open it up to you all to have a discussion with the panel. If you have questions about the film or just more broadly, we're really interested in creating a space to create dialogue so that we can build together against solitary confinement, both in Massachusetts and nationally. So thank you so much for being here. So with that, I'm going to press play, basically.
The box, DDU, shoe, the can, the dungeon. I had no idea what 90 days isolation was. Come to find out, they take everything from your room. They took everything from my room. All they left was a Bible. They said, this is the only thing that you're allowed to have during this time period of isolation.
It seemed like a dungeon. You really couldn't see anything except for the wall in front of your cell.
All you have in there is a bed, a sink, and a toilet.
And it was 100+ degrees in that cell.
There's no type of natural air or sunlight that you get.
Dehydrated.
You're locked in there 23 hours a day. You come out, you take a shower every other day.
They would only uncuff one hand. So you had to shower, shave, and everything using one hand.
Then you go out to the yard that they call a yard every other day. And the yard is basically a kennel. You ever seen what a dog kennel looks like? That's exactly what it is.
The first thing that they did was they stopped my medication.
No, they mess with you in there. From all outside connections, you're disconnected. In the hole, you have no connections at all to nobody.
One of the things that we had learned a long time ago was the need for sensory stimulation, especially something like touch. People need to be held. People need to be loved and touched and hugged. I did rounds at the Departmental Disciplinary Unit, also known as the DDU.
This is DDU, but there's nowhere else you can go. Hell is next.
You're not getting this full use of your brain. You're really just using this part of the pathways that you're using for survival.
That first hug meant the world. I could feel it. I could feel all his emotion when he hugged me and he held my daughter for the first time, because he hadn't had that human touch for so long. We kind of just sat there quietly for a little bit, because you really don't know what to say. You just see somebody you love. Knowing that there's nothing that they can do.
Every minute you're in yourself. I think the only time you have peace in there is when you're sleeping, because you're not constantly in your mind.
For some reason or another, I would count my fingers over and over. I don't know why.
I don't think no matter how tough you are, how brave you are, how much time you spend in the hole, in and out of the hole, there will be a point in time that it will break you.
I swallowed razors, forks, spoons.
Why did you do that?
Because I was in segregation and I didn't want to be in segregation anymore. I was being isolated, had no one to talk to, stressed out, scared. I had the thoughts to be self-harmful.
When somebody who's been deprived of touch for a long period of time and they are starting to feel very depersonalized, they're starting to feel very numb, they will engage in certain behaviors to start to feel like they're real, that they can feel.
Being in there with yourself for so long, once you want to do something physical, you want to feel something. You know, banging on the wall can make you feel, a little bit of pain where, oh, this is a different feeling from just sitting down and I'm rubbing my back against this mattress for so long.
Some of the things that they would do is provoke situations where a move team would come in. And they would say, I just can't, I have to do it. I can't stand not feeling. And if I have a move team come in, I can get this energy out, I can feel, I can fight, I can feel like I can feel real again. And they would get brutalized and they would get hurt because they were just not ever equipped to truly take on 5 men in riot gear.
When I came out of that hole, man, it was like always on the lookout. Wouldn't trust a person sitting next to me, no matter if I knew you before I went in there. Like the defense wall was up. In a grocery store, I usually try not to let no one, unless it's my wife, stand behind me. If there's only 2 or 3 people at a line today, and we're at a shopping store, we're actually getting ready to pay, I'll let you go in front of me. Or I stand sideways, that way I can see who's actually to my left and my right. I actually prevented my kids from playing hide and seek with me. 14 years later, and it still affects me today.
You know, I got myself in trouble. And, you know, at some point you try and figure out how you can rectify, you know, how you can maybe not fix, but how you can make things right. And you do that by bouncing things off of other people. You know, you do that by communicating with other individuals who may be able to help you, you know, to right the ship. I was being treated like someone who was less than human. You know, I was treated like someone who had no value.
90% of the population that are in custody right now, who are in a correctional facility, are going to end up back in the street. So what are we doing in the correctional facilities to actually help them reintegrate back into society?
I met Kathleen via Twitter, full disclosure, but then we connected at a Black and Pink meeting, which is an awesome abolitionist organization that's nationwide, but it's founded in Boston. And she recently received her master's degree in public policy from Brandeis University, and recently is a member of the Just Leadership USA 2015 Leading with Conviction cohort out of New York City. And you can read more about all of the panelists in our program out there. But she's going to speak about her experience. And then next we have Liz Matos from Prisoners Legal Services. She's a staff attorney there. And I work closely with Liz through the Coalition for Effective Public Safety, coordinating that effort. And before she worked on prisoners' rights, she did immigration law. And she was, before being a lawyer at all, she was an immigration advocate. And then we have Jason, who directed this film and is currently in the process of working on the Joe Donovan Project, which is about a juvenile lifer from Massachusetts who is actually got parole, right, Jason?
Yes.
Yeah. So he's in the process of stepping down and then out of the criminal justice system. And then to his right, we have Marianne, who's the co-founder of the Prison Birth Project, and the director of the Doula Project. And she's based in Western Mass, and I just found out it's her vacation week this week, so we all need to give her an extra round of applause for coming all the way out to Boston A, and then coming on her vacation week B. And then finally, we have Bobby DeLello, who I had the pleasure of meeting earlier this year at our Springfield forum, and he drove me back. And Liz was going to give me a ride, but then he offered, and I have known about him for years. And so I kind of wanted to hear all of his stories, and I got a glimpse of that, and you'll hear some of them tonight. But he is an excellent advocate, and he brought free copies of Breaking Down the Box, which is it's a newly produced film on solitary that the National Religious Campaign Against Torture created. And so if you haven't already, feel free to take one or more. We have more than that if you need. So with that, I'll pass it off to Kathleen, if that's cool? Sure. To get us started. And so they're each going to speak for like 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll see where the conversation goes. So thank you.
Okay, so let me know if you can't hear me. So I'm Kathleen. I guess I'll start with my experience in SHU. I was incarcerated in California for several years, and I was in solitary twice. Once for 3.5 months, and the second time for 4.5 months, so about 8 months altogether. And it's most commonly called SHU there, which is the Secure Housing Unit. And at the time, SHU for Women was in Valley State Prison for Women in Central California. It was the largest prison in the world at that point. And the SHU unit was modeled after the supermax prisons, that units that have really been built over the past 25 years or so. One of the most famous is Pelican Bay, and I think in Massachusetts too, they also model it after a supermax model. My cell was about 8 by 8, not about, it's precise, it was 8 by 8. And I was put into SHU both times for nonviolent offenses, rule violations. To give an example, and I think this is important because I think there's also this, people who commit or act out in violent ways do end up in SHU or solitary. Many people in solitary do not. And so the specific rules violation why I was in was typical in that it was under a category of potential disturbance to the facility or to the security of the facility. And basically I was on a work crew, and in the women's facility I was in, the lieutenant in charge of the facility was upset because they were finding a lot of garbage in the plumbing system of the facility, and including tampons from all the women. And they ordered us as punishment to clean out the septic tank of the facility and our work crew explicitly, and they ordered us to put our bare hands into the water of the septic tank to rake it out. And there was blood and feces in the water, and I was at the time the leader of our work crew, appointed to be the leader, and I refused, and I said that I don't think the women who accompanied me here are going to consent to that either, and we said exactly why, and we said it calmly, and we simply refused to move. And so I was cited with disturbing the security of the facility, and I was taken to the Supermax SHU unit, where I stayed until I fought that that disciplinary charge, and that took 3.5 months. So it was an 8x8 cell. At the time, they had blacked out the windows. The units had windows, but they blacked them out with black paint. And at that time, and this was true for both of my stints in solitary, they kept the lights on, just slightly dim, 24 hours. They said this was a change. They needed to see our faces because there had been a lot of self-harm and suicide attempts. And so for both stints, the lights were on 24/7. They also didn't take us out as they were supposed to. We were supposed to get by regulation 9 hours a week out of the cell. And because of overcrowding, and they said a shortage of officers, they did not. And that was true during both of my stints. So it was, the first thing I noticed was physically a really rapid weight loss that I couldn't explain because I usually don't lose weight at all. But it was just as much as I ate of what they gave me, and I was extremely hungry all the time. I could not, and I think it was the stress. I kept dropping weight, and they eventually brought clothes from juvenile facilities for me because I had lost so much. And I also found that the conditions in the cell, the light, the guards, the cell extractions that you saw in the film, I think is a really common occurrence in my experience, and extremely violent, extremely hard to witness. When I have my nightmares today, I do have them about cell extractions. And we were strip searched and cavity searched every time we were brought out of the cell, even to shower and to go back in, including for disciplinary hearings in which we were shackled and at their ankles and hands and accompanied by a guard. We were still completely strip searched and cavity searched going in and out of the cell. And that was done sometimes in a punitive manner among the women, for the women. And I found as the months went on that I really had trouble concentrating in ways I didn't when I wasn't in solitary. And Rachel cut me off. I don't know what time is. So I really was very active in general population in the prison. I taught GED. I set up Spanish conversation groups with the women. I taught yoga. I was extremely active, and I read voraciously. I found that after months in SHU, I lost my concentration to do that. And I worked hard to prepare and keep my mental facility in my mind. My goal was a disciplinary hearing to get out of there. But it was very difficult. And one of the men in the film mentioned counting his fingers. I tried to keep lists of the most inane things. I think just to somehow count and keep lists. I kept a running list throughout my time in prison, and especially in solitary, to the extent I could, of everything dehumanizing I saw, and then a separate list of everything humanizing I saw, from the most little things to the biggest things. And I found that helped me. It helped me process what was going on in SHU, in the prison, and elsewhere. And it just the counting helped me. But both stints in SHU continue to be part of prison that really affects me today. I have a hard time in public spaces that are exposed. When I got out especially, and still, I have a hard time in crowded rooms, in movie theaters, in very crowded spaces. And I also have tough time in small spaces, even with people who are dear to me, which is heartbreaking. But solitary is something that I think one of the misconceptions is that it is used for the worst of the worst, and in fact, it is almost ubiquitous now. It is it's almost as common as going to jail, I would say, in its use in prisons. And to the extent we can, it is of damaging effect to almost everybody I know universally when they get out. And in that sense, I think it is a real public safety concern. And I really encourage everybody to do everything they can to work against it.
That was great. Thanks so much, Kathy, for sharing that. And I just, my name is Elizabeth Matos. I'm a staff attorney with Prisoners Legal Services. And I want to thank Kathy because I know that it's not easy to talk about that experience and rehash those memories, as it wasn't for Danelle and Benito in the video. And I also wanted to, Danelle asked me to say sorry that he couldn't be here today. He was one of the gentlemen in the video, but said he'd be happy to be available if anyone wanted to email him with questions or ask him about the experience. But he has a very good excuse for not being here tonight, and that he finally, after over a year of looking relentlessly for a job, has a secure job. As you know, with Corey's, it's not easy to find a job once you get out of prison, and he struggled for a long time and finally has a job now, and hopefully all goes well with that. But so I wanted to just say that on his behalf. So part of the reason we wanted to put this video together is to try and educate people from the perspective of those who aren't just walking around, except for events like this, talking about this. And Sophia, who's an intern in our office, is here today, and I were talking about this today, and she mentioned something really poignant, that it's such a hard thing to express because it's so hidden, but it's also so internalizing. It's so much of the experience in solitary confinement goes on in your head, but also gets manifested in very physical ways. So at Prisoners Legal Services, for those of you who haven't heard of us before, we do litigation, class action, and otherwise. We do intake advocacy, just kind of day-to-day, helping prisoners with issues that they're dealing with in the prisons. These are all civil rights issues, not criminal. And we do some policy work too. And because we've heard so much about this issue over the years, we've done a lot of litigation on it, or doing litigation on it right now. But we put this bill together to reform the practice of solitary confinement in Massachusetts, to try and address this on some systemic level. So as Rachel mentioned, there are hundreds of people in solitary confinement at any given moment in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is one of only 3 states in the country where you can be sentenced in a disciplinary hearing, like the one that Kathy referred to, for up to 10 years in solitary confinement for a disciplinary infraction. That's an eternity. We don't know anyone, and you'll hear more about this from Bobby, who's come out unscathed from an experience like that. In many ways, or I'd say in all ways, this bill is really based in incontrovertible scientific evidence of how solitary confinement is permanently damaging to humans. And I think it's probably permanently damaging to animals too, but unfortunately sometimes we have more sympathy for animals than humans who are incarcerated in our country. And I think one of the things, and you heard a clinician refer to this, the sensory deprivation, is so huge that you actually start to change neurologically and start to react. You start to kind of disassociate from yourself. Self-harm is the incidence of self-harm in solitary are far higher than in general population, general prison population, and certainly far higher than in the on the street population. The suicide attempts, successful suicides are far higher in solitary confinement. They are 4 times as high in the general prison population than they are in society, and they're even higher than that in segregation. So what our bill would do is it uses those evidence-based practices and the research done on solitary confinement, and is similar to other bills in the country as well, but is really a complete overhaul of the solitary system. It gets rid of the DDU, which is those 10-year disciplinary sentences that currently exist in Massachusetts. It infuses more mental health services into the system, so that mental health clinicians are actually part of these disciplinary hearings, and they can say, well, this person has an open mental health case has a number of mental health diagnoses, and they should not go to solitary confinement because we know that they'll digress, and we know that they could have permanent psychosis or other issues. And it also screens out certain people from solitary confinement, like pregnant women, which you'll hear more about when Marianne speaks, as well as youth and deaf and blind individuals. There's a separate bill pending also that would screen out youth from solitary confinement, but we've included it in our bill as well. So those, I think, are kind of the broad strokes, but also one thing that people should know is that people in Massachusetts right now, there are many people who get released directly from solitary confinement to the community with no step down, no programming, nothing. And to go from that kind of intense experience to, and many people have been incarcerated for years and years, and then go from solitary confinement to the street is definitely not a recipe for success. So the recidivism rates, as you can guess, are much higher for people who spend time in solitary confinement in prison. And it's a public safety issue, not just because of the practice of people getting released directly from solitary to the street. That's obviously concerning and a public safety issue, but as Kristen alluded to in the video, 97% of folks who are in prison and county jails get released. And although it's 500 people at a given time, or like the very general and underestimated numbers of people who are in solitary confinement, most people who go to prison end up in solitary confinement at one point in time or another. And the UN Rapporteur on Torture has said that evidence shows that after 15 days, solitary confinement constitutes torture because it can permanently impact you. So this is a practice that really should not be happening the way it's happening in Massachusetts. It's certainly not the worst of the worst. We've had people who have had, excessive postage stamps, scream too loud during a Patriots game. I mean, really, really minor petty things who end up spending weeks, months, even years in solitary confinement. And particularly for African-Americans, Latinos, Benito and Danelle know this better than anyone. Their numbers are disproportionate in prison, but they're also disproportionate in segregation. We know in Massachusetts, anyway, that extremely punitive DDU that I talked about, 70% are Black or Latino. So women are also more disproportionately experiencing time in solitary confinement. That's the number, the population that's growing most in the prison population. But overall, it's really those with mental health issues. Because there is very little, if any, adequate training of staff on mental health issues, and so they're not trained to know how to deal with prisoners who have diagnoses like post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar, schizoaffective disorder. We're talking about, not just the very serious diagnoses, but people who are acting out as a manifestation of their disability are ending up spending long periods of time in solitary confinement. and not getting mental health services as a result. So that's why we filed this bill. And if anyone wants to talk to me more about it afterwards, or feel free to send me an email, I'd be happy to talk to you more about it. But right now it's pending in the legislature. We had a hearing on October 14th. It remains to be seen what the legislature will do. But I think this would provide more benefits to people than the litigation that we've been doing for, over 10 years. That's gotten us some progress, but not a ton. So, thanks.
Hello, my name is Jason Pugatch, and I guess I'll talk a little bit about how I came into this world of criminal justice policy advocacy. I'm still working on a feature-length documentary about one of the first juvenile lifer in Massachusetts to receive a parole hearing in the wake of a ruling by the Supreme Court that declared that mandatory life without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional, and another ruling in Massachusetts that said all life without parole for juveniles is unconstitutional. And in the course of kind of learning about this guy's name is Joe Donovan, and in the course of learning about Joe's experiences in prison, he shared with me that he estimated 7 to 8 years of his sentence in solitary confinement. And I was just kind of blown away by that figure. And then he started to explain to me the different ways in which you can be in solitary confinement and whether or not it's called solitary confinement. That's one of the reasons the film starts with all the nicknames for it, because most states refuse to use the term solitary, and if you ask them if there's solitary confinement, they'll say we don't have that. I think the official term in Massachusetts is DDU, or segregation. So for various infractions, you can get sent to a cell. While you're waiting to get into solitary, sometimes it's so full that you have to wait in another cell alone before you get to solitary, which doesn't officially count towards your time in solitary. Once you're in solitary confinement, in Massachusetts at least, one of the things that happens is any infraction that you incur there, whether it's, you're too loud, you mouth off to a guard, you are unhappy with your food that day and you dump the tray, any ticket knocks you back to the beginning of that month. And so so Joe was sentenced, he told me, I think the longest time he got sent to DDU on the sentence was maybe a year. But he ended up doing 4 years off of that time because of these various infractions that occurred while he was in there. And so this idea of a place, which our prisons have become without oversight, without anybody looking at what is happening in there, makes me very fearful about our world. And I met the folks at Prisoners Legal Services and interviewing them about the state of parole in Massachusetts, actually, and came to admire their work. And so when Leslie Walker came up to me and Max McMahon, who's produced this with me, who's here tonight, and asked us if we knew anyone who would tape some testimony, we just sort of jumped at the opportunity. And originally this film was because there were people who were afraid they would kind of break down in personal testimony before the State House in the committee, I believe. And so we just started to try to gather experiences. And it became clear as we did that there were a lot of commonalities in the experiences, which to me sets like patterns of fact and about what's happening. And so I feel like my job as a storyteller is to like take the cliches of what we're told and try to break them down so we can understand the experience in a way that we can actually feel. I would invite Donnell over to my dinner table anytime, or Benito. Like, so many people have struggled in their lives and gotten to a point where they may land in prison. I grew up in Cambridge, and one of the lines that I like about the high school is that you're as likely to be sitting in a class at Cambridge Ridge and Latin next to somebody who's going to go to Harvard and somebody else who's going to go to prison. And that to me speaks about what youth can be like. And the idea that we're not only not going to rehabilitate and not forgive, but that we're actually going to harm further the people who are doing their time. I mean, they're doing what we have asked of them in terms of our laws, strikes me as just kind of sickening. So I would encourage everyone to try to learn more about the specifics, to learn about kind of the paradox of Massachusetts, which is that we're known for being liberal, but many of our policies are far from that, and to kind of spread the word now, because you don't get a lot of shots at change, and it's in the news right now. Solitary confinement is a big ticket that people are paying attention to, and so that's why now is the time to call your state reps and to let them know that this is an issue that's important to you, for many reasons. And it could be because of the cost of keeping someone in solitary, and it could be because of your feeling about human rights, and it could be something about safety. But it's something that I think our state and our society needs to move forward from. So that's where I'm coming from.
So my name is Marian Bullock. I am one of the co-founders of the Prison Birth Project. We're located in Holyoke, Mass. We're about 2 hours from here. We primarily work in a county jail in Massachusetts, Western Mass Regional Women's Correctional Center. It opened in 2008. It was built as the second women's facility, and specifically women's facility in Massachusetts. It was earmarked as a gender-specific jail. And I came to this work having been incarcerated myself in a county jail in Alabama when I was 19. And I was never in solitary confinement. I'm extremely thankful for that, because when I think about what got me through just the short time that I was there, it was really the person that I was with in the pod. But when I got out of jail, I sort of started thinking about how we drive by these places and we don't see these places unless we have a loved one there, or someone who we're going to visit, and they're often hidden in our communities, and we don't even know that that building exists as somewhere that people are locked inside of. And I started sort of thinking about and reading statistics and things like that. And this was at the same time that there was a fight going on in Western Mass against the building and construction of the jail that I now work in. And just to be clear, the organization I work for is a community-based organization, so we're not funded by the Sheriff's Department or by the Department of Corrections. We're funded by independent funders and donors. But we do work inside and outside the jail. And so, but I really wasn't finding many statistics about county jails. And I knew that this one that was being opened was a different facility. It was going to house women that had a sentence of 3 years or under, and it was going to house women from all over the state. And so currently, WCC houses anywhere from 250 to almost 300 women there. The majority of them are there, haven't been convicted of a crime or sentenced yet. Most of them can't make bail. And they're primarily coming from Hampden County, Worcester County, Franklin County.
Those are the three biggest places that we have people coming from. And so what our organization does is we work with pregnant and parenting people inside, and then when they get out back in the community. And what we started hearing a couple years ago, which is one of the things we were also at the hearing on the 14th of October, about videotaping, that women were being videotaped while being strip searched when they were being brought to solitary. And, you know, we knew that there had been a court case that had been going on. We had worked with a woman inside who had worked with lawyers, and it came down that it was unconstitutional, that this was a practice that they couldn't find was being done at any other jail or prison in the country, was what the newspapers and the lawyers had said. But WCC was filming, and men were filming women being strip searched when they're brought into solitary confinement. So this settlement came down in May, but we're still finding that women are experiencing this. And we don't know where else they might be experiencing this, but we know that the state said this shouldn't be done. So there's a bill right now that would make it so that it's currently illegal, or it would be illegal to videotape someone while they're being strip searched before they go into solitary. At WCC and most of the women that I've worked with in county jails in Massachusetts, it's often called protective custody, not solitary. And so when I first started, I just wanted to tell two short stories of, how solitary confinement affects specifically the women that I'm working with now. So when we first started, every woman that we worked with, after she gave birth, about 48 hours, she would be brought back to the jail, and then every single person would be put in solitary confinement. We were given two reasons that women were put there. Women were put there, one, because they were then detoxed off of any kind of drug maintenance they'd been on to support the pregnancy, and two, because they were leaking fluids and it was a medical issue. And so we immediately started asking questions like, well, is anytime anybody's menstruating, are they put in solitary confinement? Or what if, and then mental health was telling us, oh, well, it's because of issues with postpartum depression. And so we were like, well, we want to see the evidence-based medical research that shows us that solitary confinement doesn't cause postpartum depression or psychosis. And we want to see the research too that says that like jail isn't like an automatic recipe for postpartum depression and psychosis. And so we actually, like, just through asking those questions within the facility that we work in, we were able to get that policy changed. And then when we passed anti-shackling in May of 2014 with Prisoners Legal Services, who we're now working on implementation with, we were able to get a piece in the legislation that said that women who gave birth couldn't automatically postpartum be put in isolation when they got back to the facility. So two of the stories that I just wanted to share real quick were, one was really early on, one of the first people that I worked with, and we sort of started, the organization really started haphazardly, where there was a couple of us in the community who had experience with the criminal justice system in our lives, in our family lives, and we wanted to just like sort of run a like weekly support group inside the jail for moms. And it quickly evolved. And so on like week 3, we had our second person give birth in the jail, who we had said like will accompany people when they give birth and support them through birth support. And I had a woman who they brought me down into SEG to meet with her. I was accompanied with a corrections officer, and I sort of sat in this 8x8 cell with her, and she was like non-responsive. She was very obviously heavily medicated, and I was trying to like do a prenatal intake form with her, and I just sort of was like, I mean, the real basics for me are like, do you want to be touched in labor? and like, where is it okay for me to touch you? And she was like, the only thing she said to me in that appointment was, I just want somebody to hold me when I give birth. And so she gave birth like 3 days later. She was brought back to the seg unit after she had her baby. I got to meet with her 3 times after that. I sort of kind of obsessively started calling the ACLU and Prisoners Legal Services and any other lawyer that I'd ever come in contact with in my life, and saying this person has like a serious mental health issue. I knew her charges. They were like related to mental health stuff. And I just never really heard from her again. And then at one point, an ACLU lawyer, like a year later, told me, oh, just so you know, like, we got that person into a mental health facility. And then about 2 years ago, I was at an event and she tapped me on the shoulder, and I like turned around to this person who was like fully functioning. I had actually had pictures of her birth that I was never able to give her because she was in segregation. And so I made my partner like run home and get these pictures out of a file to give her at this event. But in talking with her, I learned that she had spent 9 months in segregation. She'd spent 6 months of her pregnancy and 3 months postpartum. And then she was transferred to a locked mental health facility where she spent another year or so until she moved into a transitional home in the community. And I, when I sort of thought about it, I thought like how rigorous I had like called all of these people, and how, there was a lot of other people in segregation that I didn't even know who they were. And the second person that I came in contact with, and they no longer let us do visits in the seg unit. That ended pretty quickly after they realized that we were contacting lawyers. But the second person was really soon after that. She had delivered outside in the community, and she had left she delivered in a hotel room. She had left the site of the hotel room, and she'd left the baby with a friend in that hotel room because she had warrants. And they charged her with endangerment. Her name was all over the news. There was all of this media in the western part of the state specifically. There was like radio announcements saying she was wanted. There was a reward. She was charged with endangerment and abandonment. And so then they found her a couple days later, and I sort of knew right away, like, we're going to have this person. Like, she's postpartum, like, or if we're not going to have her, we're going to like fight to have her. And so she was brought in. She was in protective custody for 5 months postpartum. We were able to visit with her. While we were visiting with her, she would tell us, like, there's another pregnant girl 2 cells over. 3 days ago, they maced the whole unit. So, like, now we have, like, pregnant people sitting in solitary confinement being maced. And she ended up spending a total of 5 months in postpartum in protective custody, and then she served 18 months in and out of being locked postpartum basically. And she went deeply into postpartum psychosis while she spent her time there. And for all we know, our weekly 1-hour visits were the only visits that she got with anybody. We'd ask her, are you seeing a mental health counselor? Are you seeing a therapist? Are you seeing a midwife to do your postpartum checkup? She had really extensive physical damage from her delivery, and she continued to suffer from medical issues for 2 years postpartum related to her delivery. And so we have when people write their story. That's all we can really do, is sort of collect these stories, and then when they're needed. And I think, as you said, or I think it was you, that people would break down when they told their story. So we've gone to the State House and testified a number of times, but it's really exhausting for people with direct experience and re-traumatizing to tell your story over and over again. So we've done a lot of collecting these stories and then just giving those to legislators. So right now we're heavily working on the strip search bill, and we're also working on implementation of anti-shackling, because we're finding that often if someone doesn't deliver inside but they're brought in postpartum, they're still often put in solitary confinement. So.
Good evening. My name is Robert DeLallo. I just turned 74, November the 19th. I have spent over 2/3 of my life in some form of confinement, from reform schools to state prisons. I spent 5 years and 1 month in DDU. It's a difficult situation to try to explain to you, because I went insane in there. I was in the block maybe 3.5 months, and I had a lawyer visit. And when I went out to the visit, there was a table in a big room, and my lawyer reached over and took some papers. I followed her hand action. When I came back to her, I lost the content of the conversation. A guard moved outside the window. I turned, looked at him. When I came back to her, I lost the content of the conversation. It really disturbed me. I thought I was losing my mind. I used all kinds of drugs in the prison system, and there was nothing like that in my experience drug-wise, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I had a list of things that I had to talk to with this lawyer. One of them was an escape charge. I had escaped from the old Colony Correctional Institution, and that got me 5 years, and I lost 1 month, so I ended up doing 5 years and 1 month. But I got back to my cell, and once I got in the cell, there was no problem. I was okay, and I couldn't figure out what the hell happened to me. And I finally worked it out. Body language and verbal skills, you do simultaneously. If you separate them, you have chaos in your mind. Now, what happened in there is the cell door is 27-inch long window, 3 inches wide, and you saw in here the corridor is really narrow. So I only see this when we talk, and I don't see body language. And this is what happened. And I had written a piece about it, and the American Friends Service Committee got it in 3 different magazines. Spare Change was one of them, and got them into DDU. And when I went out to the yard, there was a black prisoner in a cage next to me, and he was literally in tears. And he said, "Bobby, that's exactly what happened to me on a visit." The visit is like 2 glass cages, and you're sitting on a round stool. And his children were playing, and he was talking to his wife, looked at the kids, came back to his wife, and lost the conversation they were talking about. He thought he was going crazy. When he read the thing, he then understood what was happening to him. And you notice that in the yard, when people talk, their hands are down by their sides. So I told guys, listen, from now on, you all got to become Italian. You got to talk with your hands, or you lose that ability. I spent many, many years in solitary segregation, isolation, whatever you want to call it. DDU was a different kind of animal. And I got a pile of legal material because they only have a little cart over there with some useless books. And guys had told me, "Bob, you got to bring your own legal material there." So I came with a big stack of material. And DDU was supposed to be a department segregation unit to comport with the Hoffa law. And it has a dining room that only the guards use. It has a gym that only the guards use. And at the end of each tier, on each row, was a classroom, a teacher's desk, school desk, and 2 big black chalkboards. They got rid of all that when Weld came in, and they turned it from a segregation unit into a disciplinary unit, and you were there to be punished, and this is what guards did. not all of them, but there was a couple that really relished on it. And you have these microaggressions that happen to you, and it's hard to explain it, that the hate, the anger, and the rage that builds up inside you. Every time you left the cell, one of these guards would go in the cell and tip it upside down. Now, I had a stack of legal paper, like literally like this, and they would take some off, go through it, put it down, take some more off, go through it, put it down. What they're doing is they're shuffling all my legal material. And it's going to take me at least 3 weeks to unravel everything again. And here's my sheets on the floor with footprints on it. I mean, they totally devastate the cell. Food comes in a tray that has a cover, and they put it in a huge microwave. And what happens is the steam builds up inside. They take the cover off. Sugar, pepper, and salt are soaking wet. You can't use it. So you have to put it up on the shelf. The next day, you take the wet stuff, put it up there, take the dry stuff, and put it on the food. When they come in, they take that away because it's contraband now. And they know that you can't use it. And there was one big guard that had the door ever opened between us, I would have done everything within my physical capacity to kill this man with my bare hands. And I was capable of it because I'm pretty proficient in martial arts in order to survive in the prison. And the hate is so overwhelming. And I fantasize cutting guards' heads off, throwing them down the corridor. And if you didn't do this, there was a thing in your gut that just ate away at you. And then, like, the ventilating system, it's a closed unit. There's no open window. And you hear this constant, and this turns into, kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself. Or it calls your name. At nighttime, you'd be laying down and you'd hear some say, yeah, what? They heard their name. Nobody called them. My TV talked to me. I had to put it underneath the table. I couldn't go near it. I was in bad shape. If I ever hit the street or general population in that condition, somebody would have got hurt, and I would have been right back into segregation. It's ironic that the guard you saw up here who said about hell, he's a IP lieutenant. And Court TV came in. Now, I used to talk with him a lot about corrections and stuff, and we had some pretty good conversations. We never disrespected each other. And Court TV came in, and they had opened up the panel on the door, and he was standing up. Now, there's a light, and beside each light is a speaker. And he was standing up against the wall, looking up, looking like this here, and he was saying to one of the reporter guys, he said, talk to him, talk to him. He was saying, talk to him. And I was looking at it like, what the hell is this, right? So they came over to me and they said, would you mind talking to us? I said, no, not at all, right? And if you ever see Court TV, you'll see that piece in there. And I was telling them stuff. I said, look, I'm in here for escape, which, I belong in here for the escape. I said, but there's about 24 people in here who are mentally ill. And that's why they're in here, because they can't function in population, so they stash them out in here, in DDU. And the guy looked at me, and he looked over to the lieutenant, and the lieutenant, yeah, true, it's true. And when he was doing that, right, I couldn't imagine cutting his head off and throwing it down a tier. And when I got that reality, there were other guards in there that I couldn't do that to them. And that's basically how I got grounded and pulled out of the insanity, is that, I was able to adjust to the reality of where I was. And I understood what was... See, the cell, like the ones you were talking about, was small. DDU, the cell's 12 feet long, 8 feet wide, 10 feet high. You can do a spinning crescent kick in there. I've done it. I went into DDU 226 pounds. I came out 172 pounds. I was stretching 5 to 8 hours a day. When they came on the tier, I sat on the bed, stuck a headphone in my ear. When they got off the tier, I took that out and started stretching and working out again. When I come out to population, my friends all thought I had HIV. They didn't understand that I was in really top-notch fighting shape. And if I hadn't have got my head together and went out into population that way, there would have been some serious problem. And if I ever saw that big guy, I would have really seriously hurt him, if not killed him. But now, when I got out there, he meant absolutely nothing to me. You know, I had other guys to compare. These guys weren't bad. Some of them are assholes. That's the nature of the beast. You know, and I was able to live and adjust to that. But the things that they do to people in solitary is outrageous. I mean, people kill themselves, and it really gets under you because they shouldn't have died. And somebody should be prosecuted for it, and nobody's going to get prosecuted for it. And some of the guards that are in there are the goon squad guards in general population. They got too much heat on them for beating prisoners up. They stash them in there. And guess what they do in there? They beat prisoners up. And in there, they get away with it. You go downstairs, you come out of a cell, you have shackles. First, they open the bottom with a wicker, and they put shackles on you. Well, no, first they start at the top. You put your arms out, they cuff your arms. Then they open the bottom one, and they shackle your feet. The door opens, you got a guard on each side of you. You walk and move at the speed that they want you to. Going downstairs, umpteen people got pushed down flights of stairs. They fell. They threw them down a flight of stairs. I never ran into that because they had more respect for and more fear of me doing something like that. I have a lot of friends in population that would take them out if they did something like that to me. But they did it to a lot of people in there. And the insanity of the place is so hard to describe to you. I mean, I did a lot of time in solitary, and nothing in DDU I had ever experienced. There's a solid door with tempered glass on it. This door goes maybe 500-600 pounds, and it can be opened by key or electrical. They never open it by key. It's always electrical. So late at night you hear, bam! And they swing this door wide open, walk in, and allow it to slam shut. They wear combat boots, and they goose step down the corridor, having nonsense conversations, talking loud like I am now. And guys would start talking about their mothers, their daughters, their grandmother, and you're not sleeping. And some of it's funny because the guards start trying to play house back. And to this day, now I got out of there on March of 1999. I still wake up every 45 minutes to an hour. It's just burnt in my brain. This is what this place does to you. It physically alters your brain. I wake up, I have water right beside on my shelf. I take a sip of water and go back to sleep. There's other stuff that is ingrained in me, like coming out into the street. I had escaped 3 times in a bunch of almost, which DOC frowns upon, and that got me a lot of segregation time. But when I was on the street, I always was carrying a gun. And if the train door opened up and Godzilla came out, no problem. When I got out this time, I wasn't carrying no gun. I was staying straight. And when this train door opened up and people came out, I had an instant panic attack. I mean, this came from that kind of confinement. Walking down the street, if a group of people went into a store, I ended up in the same store, not knowing what I was doing in there. I bought a wallet in Filene's basement. It was a big thing full of wallets. I was incapable of picking out a wallet. I just took one. It cost me $12. And I had that for years and years. It literally fell apart on me. When I got out, my brother and sister-in-law brought me to CVS. In the prison, you had one toothbrush, a white toothbrush. It came in 3 flavors, soft, medium, and hard bristle. So you went in there, and there were 2 long shelves as long as this table of every shape and size of toothbrush on the planet Earth. Some of the stuff looked like you could mine gold with it. And I couldn't pick a toothbrush. I was totally incapable of picking a toothbrush. And I told my sister-in-law, I said, Lo, just grab me a medium. And she looked, and there was a section about like this. She said, oh, here's medium here. And it was just a small example of the larger tooth. And I said, please, just grab me something that I could brush my teeth with. I couldn't pick anything. I mean, none of them looked like a normal white toothbrush. We went to Walmart, and I had been wearing scrubs for like 20, 25 years. And my brother said, well, grab 2 pairs of pants. Now, it's like 100 feet across, 3 shelves high. And I just said, Louis, toothbrushes. I said, just grab me 42 waist, 29 leg. I couldn't pick out anything. The super stop and shops, I mean, those weren't out there when I went in jail. It was just little markets. And I would go down an aisle with a cart. I can eat that. I could eat that. I don't like that. I would end up with a cart full of food that had no relationship to each other. I bought food as though I bought food out of a canteen. You didn't buy something to make a meal out of. You bought something just to eat. That, oh, I could eat that, I could eat this. It took a long time, but successfully, to learn how to start to cook all over again. Prisons just tear you apart. You lose your ability to function as a human being. They tell you when to wake up, they tell you when to go to sleep, they tell you when to eat, with the exception of escaping, which I successfully did 3 times.
You also overturned your case.
Oh, yes. That was a good part, is
Bobby got himself out of prison.
had they not given me 5 years and only gave me 2 years or a year like they normally would do, but at the time, Old Colony Correctional Center was the flagship prison with all this super-duper electronics, and me and Joe Correa circumvented the entire system and literally walked out of there. So they were kind of pissed at us, and we got 5 years for our great effort. But had they only given me a year or 2 years, I would have just sat back and planned my next escape. But the 5-year thing had nothing to do, so I studied the law and found all kinds of holes in my case. I got out in population, overturned my natural life sentence. I was involved in an armed robbery of a jewelry store in town, Boston, and my co-defendant and I went in 2 different directions, and he shot a cop and later committed suicide, so somebody had to go under the bus. So I got a natural life sentence without the possibility of parole. Death penalty was recommended not to be sentenced to the death sentence. What they did back then was outrageous, and
I think we want to get to questions.
I'm sorry?
I think we want to get to questions.
Oh, okay. Anybody got a question?
Bobby, you once told me how long it took you to be able to even talk about all of this stuff. Because it's,
Oh, it took a long time, yes.
Say a year, 5 years, 10 years?
It took a few years. I could get up and talk up to a point, but I couldn't touch the important stuff because I had no way to deal with it. It would come up and overwhelm me. But eventually people would ask questions and force me to go into that area a little more in depth. And now I can deal with it. I mean, there's nothing I can't talk about.
Sorry, could I just interrupt? Because Jason, you mentioned that Joe spent 4 years in solitary when he went in on a 1-year sentence. And that because each month, if you got a disciplinary ticket, that month was wiped off and you couldn't count it towards the sentence. But PLS recently...
I should mention that we just successfully litigated that issue, and so that can no longer happen. You cannot lose credit for time that you've spent, and we've actually heard from a number of prisoners who said for the first time they've been able to step out of the DDU, and so we're very happy about that. But again, it's just like chipping away at this big iceberg, and but at least that can't happen anymore. Sorry, I also want to say, if you're interested in the bill, there are fact sheets over there on pretty colored paper, or pretty, I don't know, colored prints anyway. But yeah, the Ivy case was something I wanted to mention, and there's more information here about what the bill would do and how it would get rid of the DDU. And there was one other thing I wanted to mention that I'm forgetting now, but the protective custody, that's what it was. So there are a lot of different ways to name solitary confinement. Protective custody is actually supposed to be this other thing. And oftentimes, just like Marianne said, they'll say, we're going to place you in protective custody, but it ends up being the same as solitary confinement, when by law, it's just supposed to be for people who are particularly vulnerable to the general population, but they're supposed to have access to everything that you would have access to in the general population. But lots of times, transgender people are put in protective custody, and pregnant women and postpartum women and don't have access to things that they should have access to, so it's essentially a punitive placement.
Yes, but keep in mind, the guy in the cell next to me is there for protective custody. I'm there for escape. And what's the difference?
Right.
We're both next to each other in the same cell, getting the exact same kind of treatment. It's just DOC madness. This gentleman here had a question.
I had a question for Ms. Bullock. You mentioned a practice of automatically placing women who had just given birth into solitary when they returned. Was that in the Massachusetts system?
Yeah, that was at Western Mass Regional Women's Correctional Center. And for a long time, and we believe still so, most pregnant women are from county jails across the state get sent there. So we see, every once in a while, we hear like there's a birth at Barnstable or there's a birth in Essex County. But if someone has if someone's sentenced in a county jail in Massachusetts, most of the time they go to WCC where we are. It's in Chicopee, technically, but Springfield, Mass. So, yeah.
One thing, if I could add something about that, is I think in women's prisons across the country, actually, the incarceration rate of women in the United States is exploding at nearly 5 times the rate of men. So you have a situation where prisons are no longer, especially prisons within prisons, things like protective custody and solitary confinement are used for anyone they want to separate for any reason. And sometimes facilities themselves are so overcrowded that those spaces are taken up, and that's increasingly true for women in a lot of states.
It's so overcrowded. Yeah.
And I mean, I think in terms of that too, like here in Massachusetts, the if you build it, they will come logic holds. So there was another, I think it was $18 million earmark to increase the capacity at WCC in Western Mass a couple of years ago, and it was a fight back and forth in the legislature, but it went through. And in the late summer, they expanded the capacity by about 120 beds. Those beds were instantly filled within about a month with people who were awaiting trial who couldn't make bail. And so last year, in our from July to July of 2014-15, we saw 29 pregnant women come through our program, and we see every single pregnant woman who comes through WCC. And this year, since July 1st, we've already seen 24 pregnant women. So we're probably going to more than double our numbers because the capacity of the jail increased by about a third.
Thank you all so much for your work on this. It's such a frightening and important story of torture. So, I hope we can all help in some way. I was wondering, is there any evidence that, separate from just the cruelty of it, are there any economic incentives for prison systems and managers to start thinking, oh, this will maximize our growth and our budgets by needing bigger prisons? Does the use of solitary in any way correlate with growth? Because you need more rooms, and more space, more guards, and fit into like some perverse, especially in privatized prisons, with
segregation units is the incompetency of the Department of Corrections. Corrections is not about corrections. Corrections is about job security. That's the nature of the beast.
Right. Bureaucracies like to self-perpetuate themselves. So I'm just asking if you have that.
No, you're right. Yeah, there is data. It's a very good question, and something we've been using in our advocacy. So there are a number of states, I think Kathleen also alluded to this, that are starting to reform their practices around solitary confinement. Some have been forced through litigation, some of it's been legislative changes, and others have been just administrative changes. And in the states that have severely diminished their use of solitary confinement, they've saved millions of dollars per year. It's costs $58,000 now in Massachusetts, or $52,000 now in Massachusetts to incarcerate someone. It's estimated to be 30 to 50% higher for those in solitary confinement because of the additional resources necessary. Bobby mentioned that he had 2 guards on him, and that's by policy, by regulation, actually, that you have to have 2 guards escorting you when you're in segregation. And when you leave the cell. So it's higher resources. But there's a very strong guards union in Massachusetts. So any opposition will likely come from there. But luckily, prisons are not privatized yet in Massachusetts. Healthcare in prisons is privatized, but prisons aren't yet. But yeah, money-wise, in all the states that have lowered their use of solitary confinement, they've experienced millions of dollars of savings per year with no correlation with increased violence. In fact, the stats show that violence has decreased as more data comes out on that. And it makes sense. Your people, as Bobby explained just now, it was his interaction with someone that kind of kept him grounded in reality, and that I think over and over is how, and Danelle referred to that in the video as well, that that's how you improve yourself, how you reflect on things is by communicating with other people. So we're glad that's happening in other states, and we hope it happens here in Massachusetts too, but we are using the data.
Just a related follow-up question. Is there any evidence that the architecture and design of the prisons themselves presupposes areas for solitary confinement?
Absolutely. It's totally ingrained in the design. It's also, however, you'll see by era, things change But the Supermax prison in Massachusetts, for sure, the design of it is very intentional, as they are for other Supermaxes around the country. Actually, the intern that was here before is an architect, and it's an area that she's done a lot of research in. But it's very, very much part of how the system is built. The units are very different. They're very intentionally set up. The yards, when they have recreation, you're in a dog cage basically outside, the size of your cell essentially. So, and that's designed to be different from recreational areas in other parts of the prison.
And I could add very quickly on that. I think, too, I think it's important to remember that the growth of solitary confinement in the United States has happened in the last 30 years or so, and it has happened with a different punitive model in prison. So the facilities are a control-based punitive model, something that was not the case 50 years ago or in the early 70s or 60s. Prisons have changed a lot, and it is as the growth in prisons has exploded in the 80s and 90s, and in most states it's incorporated a very punitive model of militarization of guards, multiple guards, units and cells, and a structure that's very much given to solitary.
Keep in mind, Massachusetts Department of Correction gets almost $500 million every single year and spends less than 2% on rehabilitation. 70-something% is for salary.
And Liz, isn't the prison budget higher than the college and university budget?
Yes.
Yes. One of the few states.
We have a question.
Yeah, my question is there, is this coming up through the courts and being an Eighth Amendment violation, solitary confinement?
Sorry, the question was, is this coming up in the courts as an Eighth Amendment violation? Absolutely. Right now, so we have a really bad case in Massachusetts from the 90s called Torres, which unfortunately said conditions like those in the DDU don't amount to cruel and unusual punishment. But much of the litigation around the country that has been successful on the Eighth Amendment grounds of cruel and unusual punishment has been focused on those with disabilities, particularly the mentally ill, who are disproportionately sentenced to time in solitary confinement. But I think advocates, it's a way of chipping at it. So it started out as, it's not an Eighth Amendment violation, and then it was, it is for the seriously mentally ill, and we're chipping away at that to be kind of generally mentally ill. I mean, the arguments are really that it causes mental illness in everyone, but, we have to go with the case law and trying to use precedent to broaden that definition. And so we're definitely trying to do that here in Massachusetts. We're working on an article, actually, that we're putting out for publication that kind of makes that argument for overturning Torres in Massachusetts. And I'm not going to say where, but we're going to be suing a county very soon on its segregation practices, and we'll be aiming to broaden that definition as much as possible. I'm happy to talk to people about that more.
United States Supreme Court Justice Roberts has suggested that solitary may be unconstitutional. That's promising.
Yeah, they want a case.
How do you get a handle on any comparisons that can be made, useful ones of course, between the federal, state, and county practices? For the public who tries to get informed, it's a formidable task.
Yeah.
And to say nothing of international prison practices, which vary tremendously from country to country.
So happy for others to answer this too, but yes, our system here is we have a federal Bureau of Prisons that's got its own practices, and some better than our state, some not, but by and large, unfortunately, better, which is not saying very much about the federal system, and less about our system here. And then there's, state prisons, right? So the Department of Corrections is a state prison system, and then we have the county facilities, which are actually separate from the Department of Corrections, and each county has its own sheriff that runs the facilities in that particular county. And each county has its own set of policies governing how segregation is run and how disciplinary hearings are done and how grievances are conducted. So there are separate policies for each county, and then the DOC has its policies that govern its facilities. But that's how it's set up in Massachusetts, and state by state, very similar to the state prisons and the county facilities. And then the Bureau of Prisons is its own animal.
From what you're saying, Elizabeth, it sounds like the legislature does not have very deep authority over at least the county prisons.
So it does. It's just the regulations that govern the DOC don't explicitly cover the counties. And there are some that apply both to DOC and the counties, and the DOC does have a role in overseeing, basically auditing the counties, but not that much happens there. But the counties really are accountable. So if we have an issue in a county, we sue the sheriff of that county, the superintendent, whoever else from that particular county, and not the commissioner of the Department of Corrections, for example. But so the legislature does, absolutely. Like this bill here, we had to write it to explicitly apply to both the Department of Corrections and the counties. Otherwise, it would only apply to whoever we named. And there is a law in the books right now, which was a result of litigation that we were involved in for years, that is supposed to exclude the seriously mentally ill from segregation in the Department of Correction. But what we're seeing in the Department of Correction is that they're just suddenly undiagnosing people, or people who came in with serious mental illness, it's basically a legal construct. It's not like a real definition, but whoever falls under that definition when they get to the DOC suddenly is not a schizophrenic anymore, or is not someone with bipolar anymore, because they only have so many beds, and they don't have enough beds for everyone who's mentally ill because prisons are now our new asylums, right? So it's a problem, and so the monitoring there is intense, and unfortunately, to litigate every one of those cases where they're violating it is extremely resource intensive. So, but that's why we want this bill passed, because then it's unquestionable that it applies to everyone, and we have a lot more monitoring power, which is built into the bill as well.
Well, keep in mind this: in Massachusetts, we closed basically all of the mental institutions, and what they were supposed to do was have community-based situations for the mentally ill, and they never financed it.
Right.
So they were thrown out onto the streets, and they went from the streets into the prison. They couldn't deal with the prison population and ended up going into segregation units, which merely exacerbates their mental illness,
right,
and they get away with it. It's outrageous.
And I think also the other thing that we found was, so when we went in there, we were assuming that like Department of Corrections statutes and policy applied within this county facility. We quickly learned that it didn't, and so we asked for county policies, which we still have never been given to this day. And when we went to legislators and reps and all of these people that, who are supposed to have the authority, what we learned is that, they have to know that there's a problem inside, because they're just assuming that like the sheriff is a good guy. Like our sheriff out in the western part of the state, he's previously a social worker. He's seen as like a liberal progressive. So sort of like the people love him. What we were finding is that like these policies that are playing out in this county jail are, unheard of. Like that, women are being videotaped while being strip searched. Like no one else in the country is doing that supposedly, but our liberal progressive social worker sheriff is allowing that to happen. And so we had a few years ago, we asked some of the women who were previously incarcerated, asked legislators to do a walkthrough of the county jail, because the only way that this stuff gets out is by people like passing through the doors, lawyers passing through the doors, community members, religious organizations passing through the doors and knowing that this is going on. And a lot of the resources of the organizations in the communities go towards state prisons. And so the counties are often left. The doors are harder to open in county jails if you're a community-based organization that wants to get in there. And a lot of that is because, they don't want folks in there because those people are turned out on the street faster. The average sentence at WCC, or the average stay at WCC is 90 days. The average sentence is 18 months. But most people who are there are only there for 90 days, and then they either are, the charges are dropped or they're continued without a finding or something like that.
I'm just curious, have you guys reached out to and worked with the National Alliance on Mental Illness? Because NAMI, they have a lot of publications and nice magazines that go out to a big population. And then this is right up their alley. I wonder if the prison world has crossed into the NAMI scene, your advocacy group.
Yeah, they definitely have been more engaged in the solitary confinement issue, and I think they actually submitted testimony on the solitary confinement bill. And when they've done their kind of broad-based advocacy, they've been mentioning solitary confinement more. But I think we can probably do a better job of bringing them into the fold, and yeah, because they're huge group, and I think the mental illness issue is a way for legislators anyway to start to understand the problem, because mental illness, that's important, we care about that. And even substance abuse, but solitary confinement, connecting the two pieces, you're like, well, solitary confinement, that's like a prison management tool. We don't want to touch that, and so it takes a while to kind of break it down and connect it to that's causing mental illness and exacerbating it. So I think they would be very helpful to the conversation.
Hi.
Hi.
So I also want to say thank you to all of you. This has been fabulous. And I really liked the short film. And something that I'm really taking away from tonight are the anecdotes, the personal experiences. And I'm wondering if there are any plans to maybe make a larger film or a longer film with more stories.
Take that video. It's up for free.
Yeah. I mean, that is part of the plan. I've talked with PLS about the different ways we could do that, or perhaps do some sort of multimedia thing that would have individual testimonies and could be a kind of interactive experience. PLS you're a nonprofit, right? So they're fighting for their funding all the time, and so the unfortunate part about when you fight for prisoners and you are a nonprofit is you're too busy to get the stories out. So that's sort of where I come in, and what we're hoping to do. Yeah.
I should say that Jason and Max, who had to leave unfortunately, did this for free. And we appreciate that dearly, but obviously want to compensate them if they do any more work on this. But yeah, we have talked about making it into a larger piece and incorporating some other elements that really tell the story, the full story. Maybe we could bring Kathy in on it too. But yeah, we're definitely thinking about that as more of like a public education piece, or this is a public education piece too, but it's really more of like an advocacy tool for now.
Anybody else? Well, thank you for coming. I think they're going to kick us out of this room shortly, but I'm sure the folks...
And please take one of those videos, they're free.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say that this film is on YouTube, on the PLS website. Share it on Facebook and Twitter, and spread the word.
Yeah, and I'm sure folks on the panel would love to speak with you also. Please, I invite you all to speak with them, possibly outside the room. And finally, I wanted to say that Benito, who's also in the film, is traveling with his wife and kids tonight, so that's why he couldn't be here. They're going to Colorado to visit his sister, but he really wanted to be here. So thank you all for coming.
There's plenty of us that get to go up there and talk.